Through Other Eyes. A Story of the Black Ship Universe. Chapter 2, Part 2. The Wrong Kind of Officer. The pilot briefing room was nearly empty when Kael and Jace arrived. The chronometer above the main holo display showed 10 minutes remaining until the start of third watch, and only 2 other officers from New Squadron were present. Sub-Lieutenant Grint Montmore lounged comfortably in one of the front seats that sat around the tactical holo table, legs crossed, one arm draped casually across the backrest. Beside him sat Ensign Maern Paskin, reviewing something on a datapad. Both nobles looked up as the hatch opened. For a moment, Grint's sparkling, gene-enhanced green eyes met Maern's. A faint smirk appeared, and a knowing look passed between them. Then Grint's expression hardened instantly. "Attention!" The command cracking across the room like a whip. Kael and Jace immediately snapped to rigid attention, feet together, backs straight and arms rigid at their sides. Both commoners' heads lowered ever so slightly, just enough to show submission. Grint rose slowly from his chair and approached them as one might inspect a pair of labor animals. "Senior Petty Officer Rynn." "Yes, my lord." The sub-lieutenant shifted his gaze. "Warrant Officer Rook," he almost sneered. "Yes, my lord." Montmore circled them. "I have been informed that the 2 of you have been performing adequately." Neither answered. The statement had not been a question. Grint stopped directly in front of Kael. "Tell me, Senior Petty Officer, do you harbor aspirations beyond your station?" Kael kept his eyes forward. "No, my lord." "No?" The noble sounded genuinely disappointed. "Not even the slightest fantasy that diligent service might somehow elevate you beyond your common birth?" "No, my lord," Grint sighed theatrically. "A shame. Delusions can be entertaining," causing Maern to chuckle quietly from his seat, whatever he had been reviewing on his datapad now forgotten. The black-haired noble turned toward Jace. "And what of you, Warrant Officer? Do you imagine that sufficient competence might someday render you the equal of your betters?" "No, my lord." "Excellent." Grint nodded approvingly. "It is refreshing to encounter commoners who understand the limitations imposed by nature." Maern looked up from his chair and in a smarmy voice said, "Rare, isn't it?" "Exceptionally." Grint resumed pacing. "One occasionally encounters specimens who mistake usefulness for worth." He glanced at Maern. "A dangerous misconception." "Very dangerous," Maern agreed. "Like a carriage horse imagining itself the equal of its owner," the blonde-haired ensign continued with a wicked smile. "Or a particularly intelligent hunting dog." "Precisely," agreed Maern Paskin. Grint stopped between Kael and Jace. "Do either of you know why noble families rule?" "No, my lord," Kael answered. "No, my lord," Jace echoed. "Because civilization requires stewardship." His voice carried the tone of a professor explaining something painfully simple. "The educated must govern the uneducated. The cultivated must direct the uncultivated. The superior must guide the inferior." He tilted his head slightly. "Otherwise, one gets anarchy." Maern laughed. Grint joined him briefly before his attention returned to the 2 commoners. "I am curious, Senior Petty Officer Rynn." "Yes, my lord." With an evil glint in his eye, Grint Montmore leaned into Kael, their noses almost touching. "When you look at me, do you see a fellow pilot?" "No, my lord." "Good," Grint smiled thinly. "At least one commoner pilot aboard this vessel possesses common sense." He shifted his gaze to Jace. "And you, Warrant Officer, when you receive an order from a noble officer, what is expected of you?" "I obey." "Regardless of whether you understand the reasoning?" "I obey." "Excellent." Grint nodded approvingly. "A trained commoner is infinitely more useful than an opinionated one." Maern's grin widened. "I may have to remember that." "You should." The hatch remained closed. With the room still otherwise empty, Kael thought that Grint seemed in no hurry to stop. "Tell me, gentlemen, if either of you were suddenly elevated to an officer rank tomorrow, what would happen?" Neither answered, so Grint answered for them. "You would embarrass yourselves, and you would embarrass the Navy," causing Maern to laugh again. "You can't simply educate generations of breeding and intelligence into someone overnight." And the ensign agreed. "Exactly." Grint clasped his hands behind his back. "One may train a commoner to fly a fighter." He gestured toward Kael. Continuing, he looked at the ensign. "One may train a commoner to lead a formation," gesturing toward Jace. But refinement, judgment, intelligence, breeding, culture, education, his lip curled slightly. Those things require noble lineage. Low-born blue bloods are the worst of the lot, thought Kael in the brief silence that followed. Then the hatch opened. Squadron Commander Dren Ignala entered the pilot's briefing room, and the moment broke instantly. Grint's demeanor transformed with remarkable speed, and he smiled pleasantly and returned toward his seat. At ease. Kael and Jace relaxed immediately. As Grint sat down, he glanced toward them one final time. The sneer never quite left his eyes. Do try not to forget your place. Yes, my lord, Kael and Jace answered in unison. Neither man's expression changed, nor did their voices betray the slightest emotion. That complete subservience, more than anything else, seemed to disappoint Sub-Lieutenant Grint Montmore. Lieutenant Ignala had paused at the hatchway, and now continued into the room, motioning at the tactical hollow table as he said, "Sit. We are going to review the exercise before we head to sim training." As the commoner members of his squadron sat, he noted the blank faces of both of the pilots and the looks of self-satisfaction worn by the two nobles. He paused in thought, then began the briefing. Later, after mid-watch mess, the senior petty officer and warrant officer returned to the hangar to carry out their squadron leader's instructions from the post-sim training briefing, and neither commoner wanted to give the already exhausted and cranky lord a reason to lash out. Lieutenant Ignala had seemed distracted in the sim training, and the grilling by Sub-Lieutenant Montmore and Ensign Paskin had been uncomfortable. No doubt the nobles were also feeling the promotion of a commoner to a noble rank, and were looking to release that frustration. "Thank you, Wyatt Staples," thought Kael as they reached Mayra Cade's office. The Void Flight Director's office wasn't much. A reinforced trans-para-steel partition, a console wall, and just enough space for deck boss Mayra Cade to control everything that mattered in the hangar on third watch. From here, she could see the hangar floor, the Raptors, the Aquilon bombers, the crew, and more importantly, who wasn't where they were supposed to be, doing what they were supposed to be doing. Kael stood just inside the hatchway again, arms folded, watching as Mayra worked through the squadron's ordnance queue. "New squadron priority 1, she muttered, fingers moving across the console. "Fuel preload, full armament staggered. No, that's wrong." Jace Rook leaned against the opposite bulkhead. "Draymore forces show up. We launch hot," Jace said. "No delays." Mayra didn't look up. "I'm aware, warrant officer." It wasn't a snap, but it wasn't friendly either, and Jace had the sense to give her a shrug of apology, followed by, "I apologize, petty officer. The Blue Bloods were especially blue-blooded this morning," which earned him forgiveness and a lock of sympathy. Kael Rynn felt the amusement of Jace's folly with the deck boss as he gazed through the trans-para-steel window at the hangar. Movement on the hangar floor caught his attention. At first, he didn't register it. Just another body moving through the deck traffic of technicians, ordnance loaders, and other crewmen moving between stations. Then he looked again. "Is that him?" Kael asked quietly. Mayra paused, looking up and following his line of sight. "Yeah, Wyatt Staples," she continued. "He came down about 20 minutes ago." Kael focused on the new lieutenant. He didn't look like an officer, not the way nobles did, not even the way a newly promoted man should. He looked wrong. Staples was walking, but not cleanly, each step slightly off. Balance uneven, shoulders tight like he was bracing for something that hadn't happened yet. He stumbled, caught himself, and kept moving. "What the hell is that?" said Rook as he straightened, just slightly. Kael didn't answer. He was watching too closely. Wyatt moved past a cluster of techs, and they didn't hide it. The looks and smirks. One of the technicians said something Kael couldn't hear, and another laughed. Wyatt didn't react, didn't even look at them, just kept moving, deliberate and slow, like stopping wasn't an option. "Has he been drinking?" Kael said to no one in particular. "He's hurt," the deck chief said with a look of concern passing over her face. Rook shook his head once. "No." Kael narrowed his eyes as Rook continued. "Not hurt and not drunk," he said. "It's something else." Staples stopped just for a second, and that was a second too long as his entire body locked. A visible, full-body tension, like something hit him all at once. His head dipped slightly, jaw clenched, and then he moved again, only faster. Not smooth, but forced. "Look at that," Rook muttered. "He can't stand still." Kael felt it click. "Implants," he said as he recalled a time from his first patrol posting when he'd seen another noble receive his first set of implants. A sharp pang of anger hit Kael as he thought, he's not a noble, and any sympathy for the man vanished. Already? Mayra said as she glanced at him. Kael didn't take his eyes off Wyatt. He's a lieutenant now. That was all the explanation needed. Staples stumbled again, harder this time. One knee nearly hit deck plating before he caught himself against a support strut as a few of the nearby crew laughed, not loudly or openly, but enough. The new lieutenant pushed off the strut and kept moving without looking at anyone or acknowledging anything. He's doing it on purpose, Rook said quietly. Kael didn't answer because he wasn't sure. The pain showed. You couldn't fake that kind of movement or hesitation. The micro-delays between steps. The way his breathing appeared to shift even at this distance. Staples didn't stop, slow his staggering gait, or ask anyone for help. He could sit, Mayra said. He won't, Kael replied when the hangar atmosphere changed. Not because of Wyatt, but because of who was approaching him. Red armor, blue hair, and fluid movement that cleared space without effort. Even from this distance, Kael could see the sword on her back, its golden quillon in the shape of wings. The lady that had been with the princess when the royal favor arrived yesterday. Lady Cynthia Winfield, said Mayra, reverence in her voice. Ah, thought Kael. A Winfield. Even on Rynn's station, they had heard of the combat prowess of House Winfield. Not only a great house, but the vassals of House Astor. That explains why Lady Winfield was escorting the princess. As the lady approached Staples, the techs backed off immediately. The laughter died, and the hangar corrected itself back to naval true. Wyatt didn't notice at first as he appeared to focus on moving, still pushing through whatever was happening to him. Then she spoke, and while Kael couldn't hear the words, he saw the reaction. Wyatt turned, stopped, and immediately nearly dropped. Kael leaned forward slightly. He's going down, Staples caught himself, barely with a sharp full-body correction that looked more instinct than control. Then he forced himself to move again. Sidestep, forward. Keep moving. What is he doing? Mayra said under her breath, stunned at the apparent snub of the lady. Lady Cynthia adjusted and matched his pace, walking beside him. Had it been someone else, Kael would have been amused at the pair as the woman in red armor towered over the lurching lieutenant. She must be almost half a foot taller than he is, if not a bit more, he thought as the lady began talking with the lieutenant. The conversation appeared to be calm and controlled, and Staples's movements changed to something more deliberate. Kael watched Wyatt's breathing change gradually to show what appeared to be less strain. She's stabilizing him, Rook said incredulously, and Kael nodded once, not taking his eyes off the mismatched pair. 5 minutes passed. Maybe less, possibly more. It was hard to tell. Staples' steps evened out, not perfect, but better than the shuffling stagger they had seen a few moments ago. The tension in his shoulders dropped as his movement smoothed. His head lifted slightly, and the trio in the deck boss office could clearly see that he was still in pain. That much was obvious, but now he was functioning. Kael just watched, and the pair stopped and spoke. This time longer, with no collapse from the newly promoted officer. Wyatt nodded and said something back to Lady Winfield, and then he smiled. It was not a wide smile, nor the proudly self-serving smile Kael was used to seeing from officers. It was just a normal smile. Honest? Real. This time when Kael felt something change, it wasn't in the hangar. It was in himself. He's not breaking, the deck boss said quietly. Neither man answered. Instead, Jace snorted a quick breath through his nose. The warrant officer's bitter stoicism on full display as in one fluid motion, Lady Cynthia turned and Staples followed without hesitation. He was following her toward the command sector lifts, past the auxilia security stationed there. As they boarded the lifts, Kael thought he saw a slight flinch on Corporal Talon's face, but at this distance it was difficult to tell. The hangar resumed like it always did after a high noble exited. Little groups of deck apes and techs formed. Loading rigs moved. Fuel booms shifted. Yet Senior Petty Officer Kael Rynn didn't move. He didn't look away until the lift doors closed on the pair and they were gone. Only then did he exhale, slow and controlled. He's going to get people killed, Jace Rook said, the words forcing themselves out of his stoicism. Kael shook his head once and sharply. Probably, he said, his voice quiet and certain. Commoners don't lead, they follow. The two men thanked Mayra for her assistance and departed. Neither spoke as Rook sent a message to their squadron leader, Lieutenant Dren Ignala, informing him that their assigned tasks were completed. Kael and Jace continued towards the lifts, each man lost in his thoughts when their datapads chimed together. As they both took up their pads, Kael saw the message was a response from the lieutenant. Task completion noted. Dismissed from duty for the remainder of the watch. Be ready in the event of scramble. Acknowledge. As they boarded the lift for the commoner berthing, both pilots quickly answered with the same three-word reply. Acknowledged. I obey. As the lift rose, Kael wondered how Lieutenant Wyatt Staples would have answered. Would he still say, I obey, to another lieutenant? What about sub-lieutenant or an ensign? And what in Julius's name was Lady Winfield's interest in him? Kael felt another stab of anger and jealousy pierce him as he recalled the humiliation of Staples in the mess that morning. A humiliation that didn't actually appear to have affected the man. What could possibly be so special about him that the prince himself had promoted the commoner? As they exited the lift to the berthing corridor, Kael and Jace didn't speak. Both men lost in their own thoughts, both commoners thinking about one thing. Lieutenant Wyatt Staples. Later, Kael lay awake long after the compartment lights dimmed to night cycle. Ventilation fans hummed through the bulkheads. Pipes clicked and ticked as heat cycled through the heavy cruiser's spine, and somewhere farther down the corridor, someone laughed too loudly before being shouted down by an irritated non-com trying to sleep. Normally, those sounds blended into the background of ship life. Tonight, they didn't. Tonight, every sound seemed sharper. Jace Rook occupied the bunk above Kael, one massive arm folded behind his head while the other rested across his chest. You're thinking too loud, Rook muttered into the darkness. Kael snorted once through his nose. Didn't know that was possible. It is when someone's tossing around like a reactor imbalance. As Kael rolled onto his back and stared at the underside of the bunk above him. I don't get it, he admitted quietly. There was a pause. That's because it doesn't make sense, Rook replied. Kael frowned slightly at the scratches in the metal above him. No, it does make sense. The warrant officer turned his head slightly, as if he were about to lean down over the side of his bunk. That sounds dangerous. Kael ignored the comment. He's not acting like a noble, Kael said, perplexed. That's because he wasn't one yesterday. No, Kael said more firmly now. That's not what I mean. The senior petty officer exhaled slowly in frustration. I've seen officers after implants before. They disappear for a few days, sometimes a week. When they return, they're different. Straighter posture, cleaner movement, like the pain burned something out of them. Rook gave a quiet grunt of acknowledgement from above. But him, Kael continued. He looked like he was barely holding himself together. Probably was. Kael shook his head. No, you didn't see the important part. That got Rook's attention. The important part? He never stopped moving. Silence from the warrant officer. He could have gone to medical. Could have pulled rank. Could have ordered the deck cleared. Kael frowned. Hell, if it was me, I'd probably have crawled into a Raptor cockpit and stayed there until it passed. A humorless chuckle escaped the older man. Honest answer. Rare for you. Kael ignored that too as he continued. He kept walking. The compartment remained dim and quiet for several seconds. Finally, Rook spoke. That's what scared you. Kael immediately opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped because the old bastard was right. It should have broken him, Kael admitted. Jace Rook stared at the dark ceiling for a while before answering. That's the problem with hard men, Senior Petty Officer. The warrant officer's voice remained calm and even. They don't always break where you expect. You think he's dangerous? Said Kael, frowning. Rook gave another quiet grunt. All officers are dangerous. That's not an answer. No, Rook agreed. It's experience. Think on this, Kael. We, you, me, Corporal Talon, probably better than both of us. We know we are expendable. The older man rolled to his side and leaned over the bunk to give Kael a serious look in the low nighttime lighting of the berth. The Blue Bloods use us as shields, he continued, his tone serious and dire. From the moment you put on your novice uniform, that message is drilled into you. That we are to be obedient, subservient, and exist to protect our betters. Nobles lead and commoners follow, said the shaven-headed man. Nobles command and commoners obey. After a pause, Rook cleared his throat and Kael looked up at him, noting the dead look in his eyes. Kael, you are the wingman of Baronet Montmore, Jace said, using the sub-lieutenant's noble title for impact. In battle, if he is outmatched and may fall to enemy fighters, what do you do? Protect him. I am his wingman, Kael said. And should he be damaged, and the enemy vector on a kill shot? Disrupt the vector with my fighter, Kael said automatically. And die for Montmore. The silence between the two men stretched as Kael felt the impact of his statement. It was a reflex response, and an honest one. The chestnut-haired senior petty officer's mind turned it over and over. He fell silent again as his thoughts drifted back to the hangar, to the laughter at Wyatt stumbling, to the way the entire deck had changed the moment Lady Cynthia appeared, and then to something else. The smile. Kael hated that his mind kept returning to it. Not because it was arrogant or smug, because it hadn't been. Staples' smile at the lady in red armor had no triumph in it, no superiority, no fear of having just snubbed a lady from a great house. Just relief. Human relief. And that humanity and total lack of fear bothered Kael more than anything else. "Did you feel any fear when you said that?" asked Rook, and Kael Rynn realized that he hadn't. It had been instinct, and he knew that faced with that situation, he would react in reality as he just did in his answer to his squad mate, a reaction that would lead to his immediate death. "No," admitted Kael. "Do you think Staples felt fear today, before he barked?" Another silence fell between them as Kael pondered the question. "Did he display fear in the hangar?" "Pain, yes, but fear of that pain?" asked the warrant officer, and again Kael recalled the mid-watch walk of Wyatt Staples. "You know what I think?" Rook asked suddenly. Kael sighed. "That usually means I'm about to hear something cynical." "You're welcome." Kael smirked faintly despite himself as the older man continued. "I think everybody on board this ship keeps trying to decide what Lieutenant Staples is." Kael turned his head slightly to look up at his friend. "And?" "And that's the wrong question." Kael waited. Rook's expression never changed, the dead look still in his eyes. "The right question is, what happens if he survives becoming one of them without forgetting he used to be one of us?" The entire compartment seemed quieter after that, as Kael and Jace locked eyes for a moment before the older man's face vanished as he rolled back over into the upper bunk. The answer to the question felt obvious. Not riots or rebellion, but something worse. Hope. A slow irritation crawled up Keel's spine at the thought. Hope got commoners killed. Hope convinced deckhands to speak too freely, convinced pilots to think skill mattered more than blood. Hope made people forget their place, and nobles did not rule the principality by allowing commoners to forget their place. Kael closed his eyes in the darkened berth as a chrono-klaxon briefly chirped softly, stating another hour had passed, and first watch continued. Senior Petty Officer Kael Rynn found himself thinking something he did not want to think. If Wyatt Staples survived long enough, then eventually everyone on board this ship was going to have to decide what mattered more. Blood or ability. And Kael wasn't sure the answer would leave the principality intact. In the bunk above, Jace Rook finally shifted onto his side. "You should sleep," the warrant officer muttered. Kael stared into the darkness a little longer. "Yeah," he said quietly, and neither commoner slept for a long time.